In the quiet streets of Iloilo, where the morning air smells like new rain and coffee, a teacher named Miguel Santos stood before a cracked mirror. He practiced the same line again and again. "Good morning, class." His students said his voice had rhythm, soft, melodic, like a song sung with kindness. But years ago, someone told him that his English was not real, that it sounded too Filipino. That line had followed him for years, like a shadow. Still, every morning, he faced his students with pride. He told them, "We don't copy accents, we carry stories through English." He believed it. But deep inside he wondered, would the world ever believe it too? That belief would be tested one day. Oxford University had begun a new project. The Future of English. Global Voices. They were studying how English had evolved in different parts of the world. Miguel never knew that his small classroom voice would one day reach their grand halls. It started with a video. One of his students recorded his lecture, a heartfelt explanation about why language is identity. She uploaded it on a small education channel, thinking only her classmates would watch. But that night, it began to spread. At first, among Filipino teachers, then among students in Singapore, Malaysia, even the UK. Within days, Oxford researchers saw it. They didn't just hear his English, they felt it. When the message reached Miguel, he laughed. "Oxford, watching me? That's impossible." But his laughter hid his fear, because he still remembered the people who mocked his voice. He still remembered being told, "Your English is wrong." Now, the very institution that defined English was listening to him. And that's where the story truly begins. The story of a voice once ignored, and how the world finally learned to listen. It came on a Monday morning. Miguel had just finished his class when the school secretary ran in, waving a letter. "Sir Miguel, you won't believe this, it's from Oxford." He laughed again, thinking it was a prank, but the seal, blue and gold, was real. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Santos, we have been deeply moved by your lesson on language and identity. We invite you to speak at the Oxford Global Language Symposium this November." Miguel froze. Oxford, the world's gatekeeper of English, wanted him, a small-town teacher from the Philippines, to stand before scholars who wrote the very dictionaries he grew up studying. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the letter like it might disappear if he blinked. His mother, old and gentle, asked from the kitchen, "Anak, what's wrong?" He smiled through trembling lips. "Ma, Oxford wants me to speak." Her hands shook as she covered her mouth. "Then go, Anak. Tell them our voice matters too." That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing one question echoing in his mind. What will I say when the world is finally listening? The flight to London felt unreal. For most of his life, Oxford was a word he only read in books. Now he was flying toward it. He looked out of the airplane window, clouds like floating islands beneath him, and whispered a prayer. "Lord, let them hear not my accent, but my heart." He carried a small notebook filled with his students' letters. Each page had a message. "Sir, tell them we're proud. Sir, speak for all of us." When he landed at Heathrow, the air was cold, sharper than he'd ever felt. The people around him spoke fast, crisp British English. He suddenly felt small again, like a child learning to speak for the first time. At the hotel, he practiced his speech in front of the mirror, his reflection trembling with every word. But every time he doubted himself, he remembered his classroom. He remembered his students' laughter, their belief that English could sound like them. That memory was his armor. The Oxford auditorium was like something out of a dream. Tall stone arches, echoes of history in every step, the air thick with intellect and tradition. Miguel stood at the entrance, holding his worn-out notebook, the same one he used in class back home, pages soft from the touch of chalk-stained hands. He looked around. Rows of scholars filled the room. Professors, linguists, historians, people who wrote books about English, who decided what English should sound like. And now, in front of them, stood a Filipino public school teacher, nervous, hopeful, and trembling. Then, the host announced, Mr. Miguel Santos, representing the Philippines. The sound of his country's name echoed in the ancient hall, and, for a brief moment, Miguel forgot his fear. He remembered his mother's words. "Anak, speak with your heart, not with their accent." He stepped forward. The lights hit his face. Hundreds of eyes turned toward him. He began softly. his voice shaking at first, then steady. "Good afternoon. I am not from a big university. I am from a small public school in Iloilo, and today, I am not here to teach English. I am here to remind us what English really means." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. He could feel their curiosity, their judgment, their silent question. What can this man possibly teach us? Miguel took a deep breath. "For centuries," he said, "English was carried by ships, taught by kings, and defined by those who had power. But language does not belong to power. It belongs to people." He paused. "In my country, we speak English not as imitation, but as identity. When a Filipino speaks English, you don't just hear grammar, you hear history, you hear hospitality, you hear heart." Some of the professors leaned forward, others nodded quietly. He had their attention now. "Filipino English," he continued, "is not broken. It is breathed. It carries the rhythm of kindness, the melody of resilience, the accent of a people who never stopped learning." His voice trembled again, but not with fear. This time, it was pride. When he finished, he looked down, afraid of what the silence would mean. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air hung heavy. Then, a single clap. It came from an elderly professor in the front row, then another. Then the entire hall rose to its feet. A sea of scholars, standing for a Filipino teacher. And in that thunder of applause, Miguel finally understood. The world had heard him. The next morning, the sun broke through the London fog. Miguel sat by the window of his small hotel room, the noise of buses and footsteps filling the streets below. He was still trying to believe what had happened. Hundreds of scholars had stood, not for a celebrity, not for a politician, but for a teacher. His inbox was flooded, messages from professors, journalists, and even students abroad. One email stood out. It was from a woman named Dr. Eleanor Hart, a senior editor at the Oxford English Dictionary. It read, "Mr. Santos, your talk opened something we've ignored for too long. You reminded us that English is not a crown to wear. It's a bridge between hearts." She invited him to meet the committee. Miguel walked to the Oxford office that afternoon, his heart pounding like a drum. The meeting room was filled with books, shelves stacked with centuries of words. Dr. Hart smiled warmly. "We've studied English in many forms," she said. "But what you showed us, the emotion, the identity in Filipino English, that's something language books never captured." She paused, looking at a stack of papers. "We'd like to add it." Miguel blinked. "Add what?" "Filipino English," she said. "Officially, to our archives." He didn't speak. He couldn't. For a teacher who once apologized for his accent, to hear those words in the very halls that once rejected it was almost too much to bear. Later that week, Oxford published a global bulletin. "Oxford recognizes Filipino English, a growing voice of warmth and clarity." News outlets picked it up. Filipinos around the world shared it with pride. Teachers cried, students smiled. The voice they once laughed at was now being studied. Miguel read the statement again and again. He whispered to himself, "For every teacher who was told their English wasn't good enough, this is for you." He thought of his students back home, the ones who said, "Sir, our English is too Filipino." Now he could finally say, "Yes, and that's what makes it beautiful." That night in his small hotel room, Miguel opened his old notebook. At the last page, he wrote, "Language is not how perfect we sound. It's how deeply we make others feel." Outside, the bells of Oxford rang. And for the first time in his life, their sound carried a Filipino rhythm. The Oxford announcement spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, Filipino teachers around the world began sharing screenshots, posting the words, "A growing voice of warmth and clarity." By nightfall, news outlets from Seoul to Sydney were reporting it. Commentators called it a linguistic awakening. But to Miguel, it felt like something deeper, like the quiet vindication of every child who had ever been told their accent was wrong. He watched the first interview request arrive from BBC World. Then, CNN Philippines. Then, students from America asking if he could join their online class. For the first time, the world wasn't laughing at Filipino English. It was learning from it. Clips from his Oxford speech went viral. One line in particular echoed across social media. "Filipino English is not broken, it is breathed." Millions reposted it. Teachers recorded reaction videos. Even call center trainers played it during orientation. Everywhere Miguel looked, he saw faces beaming with a pride he'd never seen before. But fame also brought pressure. He received invitations to speak in universities he had only read about. He was suddenly called a linguistic reformer, a symbol of Southeast Asian identity. Yet when reporters asked what success meant to him, he smiled gently and said, "Success is when a student no longer apologizes for the way they speak." In that simple sentence lay the heart of the movement. English had finally listened, and in the echo of Miguel's words, the world heard the soul of the Filipino. Influencers and experts joined the conversation, amplifying the message of linguistic equality. A viral YouTuber celebrated Filipino English as a superpower, highlighting code switching and empathy as global assets. Linguists explained, "There's no single correct English. There are many Englishes, each valid." Dr. Elena Cruz argued that calling Filipino English wrong is both scientifically and socially flawed. Celebrities shared stories of being told to lose their accents, now embracing their heritage with pride. Humor and heartfelt testimony brought the issue to a wider audience. The collective voices, academic, celebrity, and everyday, created a chorus of validation. They proved English's value lies in connection, not conformity. Maria's story became a symbol of this shift. The movement was now unstoppable. The biggest change was internal. Filipinos began to see themselves differently. Young people embraced their natural voices online, celebrating Filipino English. The term "Konyo" was reclaimed with pride, no longer a slur, but a badge of identity. Teachers like Maria taught world Englishes, empowering students to be confident communicators. Companies shifted from accent erasure to valuing clear, empathetic communication. Filipinos abroad found new confidence, armed with the knowledge that their English was globally recognized. The anxiety of being judged faded, replaced by belonging. This was about more than language. It was about decolonizing the mind. Filipinos claimed ownership of English, shaping it to fit their culture. It was an act of self-determination and pride. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a copy, but a unique, confident Filipino face. Their voice, finally, was their own. What began as mockery became a testament to language's power to unite. English isn't a monument, it's a living river, shaped by every culture it touches. Filipino English, vibrant and empathetic, is proof of this evolution. Maria's journey reminds us,